Conversation with Dr. Chaudhary, who is the Managing Director of SRL Diagnostics, and we left off in the first segment about talking about the Health Ministry and some norms. Now, while we're at it, Dr. Chaudhary, in fact, in the last budget, the government has given subsidies for preventive health checkups. After that has happened, have you seen any kind of an uptick in people walking into SRL Diagnostics for their
preventive health checks? Yes, we have, but unfortunately not for the reason of subsidies. But for the reasons of people becoming more aware that a stitch in time saves 9.
Right.
And prevention, the cost of prevention is significantly lower than cost of managing a disease. And
prevention, of course, is always better than cure.
Always better than cure. So that's the reason people are coming in. We did a dipstick study. If any of them was there for the reason that the union budget had an announcement that there is a separate allocation of about 5,000 rupees for preventive health check for any tax assessee. But we actually didn't find many who were there for that reason. So I think the reason could be that it hasn't been publicized enough. People don't know about it. The medical allowance on the personal taxation is something that the corporate tax people manage. Employees generally don't know about it. So I think it would be lot more impactful if the Finance Ministry or Health Ministry were to publicize this, that any money you spent on preventive health has an exemption, and the people should be encouraged to go to...
Do you expect the same out of the new budget which is about to come in?
Hopefully, and it must specify that only accredited, nationally accredited labs have the ability to provide the service, because otherwise we wouldn't know whether malpractices come in, people don't get tests and yet take the allowance for somebody and split it with someone. So
now, you mentioned about growing awareness. Of course, one thing is there is a growing awareness. The other thing is indemnity. Because of these reasons, doctors are prescribing tests much more than they used to in the past. And this has been linked in a very negative connotation. It's also been linked with medical malpractices as well. How far is that true? How do you perceive a scenario like that?
Well, I would say that we need to understand the entirety of this context.
Right.
It is true that some malpractices do take place, but it is also true that the diseases are deceptively similar today. If you walk into a medical practice and say, I have fever,
right,
you'd be surprised to know there are 450 types of fevers. So how can any physician, just through physical examination and description of the symptoms, decide that this is the line of medication?
But you know, how do I, as a normal patient, being a common man, come to know whether I'm being a subject and a victim of the medical malpractices, or is this actually true for me? How do I differentiate it when I know nothing about medicine? I'm not a doctor. How do I know that?
Yeah, I think in matters of health, patients walk in with immense faith on the physician or the doctor. And actually, it is the personal scruples and ethical commitment of the doctor that really makes the difference.
Okay.
So if the doctor chooses to compromise integrity and write tests that are not required, rather than use the tests for correct determination of disease, so I think the line is very fine.
So pick your doctor with your due diligence.
Pick your doctor with your due diligence, and where you have faith that the doctor's actually interested in you and not your wallet, is I think the right determination.
Interesting. On that note, let's play a chip shot.
Sure.
Just about missed the bunker.
Good.
In India, there's a concern over overpricing. There is no regulation to keep that, or legislation rather, to keep that in check. Whereas in the Western counterparts, we've seen that there is very stringent legislation that keeps overpricing and over-referrals in checks. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think the big difference is that most of the developed countries, the healthcare costs come from insurance.
Right.
And then the insurance sector itself makes sure that the delivery sector, healthcare delivery sector, charges correctly,
right,
fairly,
Right.
and in a certain proportion related to the disease. Now, because vast majority of Indians still pay for their personal health care, they find sometimes even a legitimate test as excessive. That why am I being tested so often? You would be surprised to know that per occupied hospital bed in Western world, the minimum number of pathology tests that take place is upwards of 30. More than 30 tests per day per patient. The reason is not that you're fond of drawing blood and testing, but you're also checking the efficacy of the treatment.
Right.
What is called pharmacogenomics.
Right.
So here people resist because for every test they have to pay.
Yeah.
And because there is no form of health insurance, and it lends itself to malpractices.
Exactly.
But again, I would say that becoming a doctor is probably one of the most difficult academic achievements that anyone can have, although chartered accountants may differ with that. But having spent so much of your life and effort in learning about human body, about healthcare, there are some that of course fall prey to malpractices. But I would say that most doctors that we meet, at least 100,000 doctors that we serve in a company out of a total population of 700,000 doctors in the country, are ethical and do things correctly.
All right, so Dr. Chaudhary, do we have any kind of a competitive cost advantage over the Western counterparts in India?
In diagnostics, the difference is nearly not as much as you would see in surgical procedures, where the difference is of a very large factor. And the reason is that the reagents and consumables and kits that are used in diagnostics are very largely manufactured in the Western world.
Right.
And so therefore they're imported.
Right.
And top of that, Indian service providers have to pay import duty.
Right.
So the raw material cost, if any, is a little bit higher than the Western world. Now, what is lower is the manpower cost or the human cost.
Right.
But the human cost in diagnostics typically is between 25 and 40%, depending on the level of sophistication, technological advancement that a lab would use. So therefore, yes, we are cheaper, but because we work on much lower margins, and we have cheaper human resource costs. But again, I think there is scope for improving that to make the quality diagnostics more affordable. And just as the finance ministry actually has significant tax breaks or zero taxes for essential life-saving medicines and drugs, the reagents used in pathology should be treated as life-saving.
Right.
Because what is it that they don't do that any life-saving drug does?
True.
So I'm really hoping in this budget, the Union Finance Minister actually recognizes the importance of the ingredients that go into diagnostic, quality diagnostics.
Now you have over 250 centers in the country, you're in expansion mode. You have also ended up pioneering a lot of these tests like food intolerance tests, whether it was the breast cancer test. What next for you as a company? What next for SRL?
SRL is clearly focused on its leadership position, which is both geographic and a moral responsibility. The geographic responsibility clearly is that if we have a certain capability to deliver quality diagnostic services, then we should make those services available through the country. We are a large nation. We're happy to share that we actually have the ability to bring in sample from any part of the country into an operating laboratory within 6 hours.
Right.
So that's a huge logistic setup that we have created, but a lot remains to be done. So we want to be everywhere in the country to offer the ability of our test menu to the patients and the doctors. And from a scientific standpoint, we have to be at the cutting edge. We have to make sure that, you see, the diseases are common, whether they happen in United States or Europe or in India. And for a lot of people, affordability of getting treatment done in United States or Europe is not there. In fact, it's the reverse that is happening now. So that can only happen if we are able to offer those tests. So we have to find a way to make them affordable, to have an engagement with the physician community that they know about these tests. Because if I have a test available in my lab, and if the referring physician doesn't know about it, it is no good.
True.
So we have to invest in continuous medical education, into increasing physician awareness.